This is case number 96103, Gray's Conspiracy.
We're finally going to get a chance to synthesize a real picture of the Greys, not just case by case by case, but what's behind the cases? What's the common ground?
If these beings are actually interacting with people, we have to meet as many eyewitnesses as possible, people who have had these experiences, and get as much detail from them as we can.
Where are all these stories coming from? And why does the image of the Greys look alike from story to story?
That's the most amazing thing. All of these sightings of Greys are identical in the way they're described.
I'll tell you why they look alike, because it's straight out of a movie, Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, really? Well, then how can you explain this? Close Encounters of the Third Kind is a 1970s movie. Betty and Barney Hill described that Grey in 1961.
Betty and Barney Hill might have given us the first description of Greys, but I think these are driven by the images that we've all seen in the mass media.
There are thousands of cases of contact with Greys.
I'm struggling to deal with just extraterrestrial crafts being on the planet Earth. And now I have to investigate the creatures that are actually flying them.
Well, you're just going to have to take baby steps.
Yeah, it's a big step.
We've had descriptions of Greys for over 40 years. There was the Roswell incident, Outer Limits, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There was the alien autopsy. But the real description, under hypnosis, came from Betty and Barney Hill, who in 1961 claimed that they were abducted by Grey alien beings. This description was the foundation for all the later depictions of the Greys on television. Large head, 4.5 feet tall, long, skinny, squiggly arms, thin legs, no nose, a slit for a mouth. Who are these Greys? But more important, why are they here?
From out of this mist, these gray beings came out with black eyes.
We are in remote British Columbia, near the town of 100 Mile House. We're going to meet with Miriam Delicato to hear about her encounters with Greys.
It was October 1988. We were driving in northern British Columbia, and all of a sudden, out of absolutely nowhere, these lights appeared behind the car. It was almost as wide as 2 lanes. We actually thought that they were a big truck or something. The lights started popping on and off. The girl driving started to get really afraid. And then all of a sudden, out of absolutely nowhere, I said to her, pull over the car. It's not you they want, it's me.
What possessed you to say that?
I really didn't know at that point.
Miriam's story, it's very interesting, but I find it a little far-fetched because she was in a car with 3 other people. None of them saw what she saw. None of them experienced what she experienced. They just don't remember it, period.
I was just about ready to grab the steering wheel because she didn't want to pull over, and her head tilted to the side and she just pulled over.
Did she pull over voluntarily?
Something must have been guiding her because all of a sudden she became very quiet. Once the car was in the stop position, nobody in the car was moving at that point. Suspended animation is the way I describe it.
There have been hundreds of stories like Miriam's, and the elements of these stories all match up.
In front, these short Greys were walking towards me, and they were about 3.5 feet tall, a little bit larger, bulbous type of heads with the round black eyes. There was no features on them that distinguished one from the other. And then I start hearing a voice in my head. And it was, okay, get out of the car, do not be afraid, we will not harm you. My hand started reaching to the handle. I'm thinking, why am I doing this? I got out of the car. They walked towards me, and they took me by the hand.
Miriam's walking to the UFO, and she's actually guided by one of these Greys. They actually hold hands. Did this really happen? What would tell me if it did or not are the details. The details would allow me to make some sort of determination. When you touched the Gray's hand, did it feel soft and fleshy, or was it a bit more solid?
It was solid. They were really cold, and it wasn't like warmth from, you know, a person or an animal. It was cold.
But wouldn't a normal reaction be to run for your life or pull yourself away from little beings that are dragging you into a ship?
Absolutely, but there was no conversation other than, do not be afraid, we will not harm you, which did actually calm me down.
This is very interesting what Miriam is saying about the Greys calming her. Maybe they have some way of doing this, perhaps telepathy's involved.
They just simply took me by the hand, led me down the highway. When I looked up, I saw a very large craft, probably about 40 or 50 feet across. And right at the doorway were these two tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed aliens.
Nothing like the Greys.
Absolutely nothing like them whatsoever. These short Greys that had been with me just let go of my hand, and I walked on board the craft with the two tall blondes.
What's the relationship of the Greys that took you from the car to these tall blondes?
I would say that these Greys were their helpers.
When you say Greys, it's not just one species of extraterrestrial. There are many, many different species of them. What we heard from Miriam is that this species was obviously totally servile, almost robotic-like.
There are multiple species of aliens visiting the planet Earth. This is completely new to me, and I'm not quite sure what to think of it right now.
We walked on board this craft, and they sat me down on this chair, and in front of me came a screen out of thin air, and then they started showing me all of these different images.
What kinds of images were these?
Images of catastrophes on the planet. Earthquakes, solar flares, war, and I was shown all of these different, what I believe is sort of like timelines and paths that humanity could take. And then I was explained how if we came together as a species, that we would be able to avoid any and all of these events.
I know Bill thinks this is normal. He's been talking to eyewitnesses and abductees for years, but to me, this is pretty far out there.
So what is the purpose of all this? What are they trying to do?
It was explained to me that they are the caretakers of this earth, and that their purpose in being here is to help enlighten us, make us aware of who we are, and to make sure that we do not destroy ourselves or the planet.
Well, this is very interesting what Miriam is telling us about the Greys, showing her pictures of wars and the way we're harming the planet. It sounds to me like they're bringing a benevolent message, that they're trying to help us. It doesn't sound to me like these are aliens that wish us harm.
I believe that some of these Greys can be trusted, and that some of them you absolutely should not.
Are the Greys here to help us or hurt us?
The Greys that I encountered, I believe, are here to help us. But there are several different types of Greys, and I know one in particular has a very dark agenda.
Bill and Peggy Foster claim that in 1996 in North Carolina, they had a close encounter with extraterrestrial gray beings. Furthermore, they say that the Greys abducted them and performed medical experiments that haunt them to this very day.
I do see some of those gray shapes.
Witnesses and abductees really have no tangible evidence that they've ever encountered a gray. So the best we can do is hypnotic regression.
Deeper, deeper, relax.
And that's what we have. We have videos of Bill and Peggy Foster's hypnosis sessions.
I guess I shouldn't have tried touching.
Something traumatic happens in these two people.
Oh, it's so great.
My life would have been 100% simpler without ever knowing anything about it.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I just wanted to forget the whole incident.
And if the answer to the question is yes, raise your index finger. Good.
Bill and Peggy Foster both claimed they were abducted by gray alien beings. They claimed that medical experiments were performed on them.
I do see some of those gray shapes.
We have the hypnotic regression sessions of Bill and Peggy Foster.
Well, this is exclusive to UFO hunters, right? This is something that we have access to. We're watching this for the first time. Nobody else has seen these tapes.
Close to my face.
This one's taller than the rest. Much bigger eyes. It's like looking into eternity.
That's poetic. He seems to be describing a gray. I think he was describing a very profound experience. I mean, you're looking into the eyes of a being that's visiting this planet. I mean, that's huge.
What happened when you look at him?
Really relaxes me.
So what do you guys think about his description of the being? Huge eyes, and the being has a tranquilizing effect on him.
Well, his description of the huge eyes obviously comports with Betty Hill's description and other descriptions that everybody has given of a gray. Huge eyes. The tranquilizing effect, what do you think? Telepathic?
Yeah, it sounds standard. I've heard it before. Feeling calm through telepathy. It's what everybody says happened.
Yes, you were just relaxed. It hurts so bad.
We can't know their inner psychological states and their character. I mean, Bill seems to have been taking this rather well. He's calm when he's reliving this, and here we can see Peggy is very emotional.
That's right, just let them come.
And I think this is the best example. This is the best evidence we have that something traumatic happened to these two people.
Peggy cringed in terror at the alien's touch. This is in stark contrast to what we heard from Miriam about the benevolent grays.
And then I start hearing a voice in my head. Do not be afraid, we will not harm you.
They're examining something. Okay. Like they're looking down.
They're doing something to her that is denying her ability to control the situation.
Listening to Peggy's experiences is very disturbing. It's excruciating watching this video. It sounds like it was a very emotional experience for her.
Although we don't have tangible evidence of some kind of abduction, we don't have a piece of a gray or a piece of the craft, this is the evidence here. A couple that has undergone some kind of traumatic experience. I think something happened to them, and we have to be open to the possibility that they had an actual experience.
So here's what we know. Miriam told us the gray aliens are helpers, but from what Bill and Peggy told us, the grays are performing serious medical experiments, some of them quite sinister. Is this a current phenomenon, or is there evidence of contact dating back to ancient times?
What if there really was an extraterrestrial contact in the remote past?
Giorgio Tsoukalos is the publisher of Legendary Times magazine. He believes the ancient astronaut theory that contact was made and documented thousands of years ago.
We have all these accounts of these beings that descended from the sky. In fact, in the ancient Sumerian culture, those beings have a specific name, the Anunnaki. And translated into English, Anunnaki means those who from the heavens came.
Exactly, and there's the evidence right in the Sumerian cuneiforms. The big head with the rays coming out of it. It's this.
Well,
are you sure?
Well, here we go again with Bill making the extraterrestrial connection without getting all the facts together. Kevin and I are trying to proceed cautiously, trying to separate anecdotal evidence from fact before we come to any conclusions.
Well, what's the ibis, the lines coming out of it?
Look at the cuneiform and look at that head.
I mean, I just don't want to get all excited and go straight to this. Well, no, I just need a little more.
What the ancients describe as gods, beings coming down from the heaven, are actually aliens coming down from the sky. This has been referenced in every culture, in every folk tale, time and time again.
This here is a photograph of some figurines that were found in Africa. And these are ancient, and here we do see some sort of a similarity with the big slanted eyes. And the stories behind these statues always is in correlation with some beings that descended from the sky.
These don't really look alike, if you ask me. I think it's kind of obvious, but looking at these African sculptures, they clearly do not resemble the Greys in any way, shape, or form.
This one right here with the cone head looks very lizard-like. This is from Sumeria.
That's a little bit closer.
And over here we have some cave drawings that look very similar to something like this.
Yeah, it's kind of eerie. Ancient cultures have always had myths and legends of beings that have been called gods, that come down from the skies. But what we need is real physical evidence that grays, which might be interpreted as gods, have actually made contact with humans.
Kevin wants proof. Giorgio pointed us to the Star Child skull, which many believe is the remains of a gray.
The Star Child skull is a very fascinating find. We don't know yet whether or not this is a misshaped human skull or whether or not it is a hybrid being, because in many, many ancient texts it is written that these gods did intermingle with our ancestors.
During all my years of researching UFOs, the one artifact that keeps coming up is the Star Child skull. I've never held the Star Child skull in my hand, but I know that it was found in the 1930s in a cave in northern Mexico by a teenage girl. It's been speculated, from the shape of the skull, that it's of alien origin, possibly from a gray. Now that we know who the owner is, I'm excited to get my hands on it. This could be the greatest single find in the history of UFOs.
I don't think we can put too much stock in what Giorgio told us. I mean, what we have are cave paintings of people with big heads and big eyes. That does not mean aliens have come to visit us on Earth.
Well, you know what? I disagree with you about the cave painting, but more important than that, we have an eyewitness. We have Miriam. Miriam said she was taken aboard a craft. She met the small grays, the large grays. So I don't think she's making it up. I think she's telling the truth.
The testimony of Giorgio and Miriam, in my opinion, it's not solid evidence to conclude that aliens have come to visit us. We need something physical.
You guys want evidence? Melanie will show you the evidence. Hi, Melanie.
Glad you came to El Paso.
We've heard so much about the Star Child skull. Melanie Young is a medical professional who specializes in neonatal care, and she's one of the most qualified people to speak on human physiology.
Oh,
wow.
Well, this is the normal one that was found.
So this is not the Star Child?
This is not the Star Child, but
okay.
This is the skull that was found laying next to the Star Child on top of the ground.
Nothing unusual yet.
No.
No.
But this is what's unusual.
My God. So this is the famous Star Child skull.
Yes, it is.
This is huge. One of the biggest events since I've started investigating UFOs. Two skulls found together. One seemingly an adult, the other apparently a child.
Do you know how old this is?
It's been carbon dated 900 years old.
Wow. This 900-year-old artifact was allegedly found in a cave in the Copper Canyon region of Mexico by a woman living in a small village. Now, I can't say there's a connection to the Greys, but if there is, it's almost impossible to comprehend.
The normal skull was laying on top of the ground with the complete skeleton. And coming out of the ground was a deformed hand. And so she dug up the deformed hand and found a complete skeleton.
Where is the skeleton now?
So she picked up both skeletons and took them back to the village, and they had a rainstorm and everything got washed away. And the very next day, this is all she could find.
In a flood, you would think that the heavier, flatter bones like the femur would have been left behind, and the lighter, rounder bones like the skull would have been washed away. But if you accept this story, the exact opposite happened.
How did you come into possession of the skull?
Well, a friend who got it from a friend who was the original owner of it gave it to me due to my expertise in neonatal nursing and anatomy. When I saw it and told them that this is totally out of this world, they were like, take it, don't bring it back.
This is obviously extremely bizarre. Is it possible this is some kind of deformity?
I've never seen anything like it.
How many deformities have you seen, have you witnessed as a nurse?
I've seen every kind of deformity you can think of, and nothing looks like that.
Some people who've looked at the Star Child skull believe that it's a human skull of someone that suffered from hydrocephalia, which is a disease that affects some infants, which causes a misshapen skull.
If it were a hydrocephalic, this would be bulged out, okay? But only one side would be bulged out, or the back would be bulged. It wouldn't be symmetrical like that is.
So a hydrocephalic skull is asymmetrical.
It's asymmetrical.
And this skull is symmetrical.
It's completely symmetrical. If that were a hydrocephalic, the bones would not be connected. There would be no skull.
What other explanation do you have for this skull?
I don't have one. I can't find one.
Now, a lot of people might challenge this story, but we've come this far. I think we all agree that we have to explore the possibility that this could be the skull of a gray. Well, guys, I mean, obviously this thing looks different from a human skull. It's big and bulbous and fits the description of what some people say alien grays look like. I'd like to get some more information on it.
Well, Lloyd Pye is our lead researcher, and he's done a lot of work with hominids. He has so much knowledge on different species and how the humans have evolved. He is the guy to talk to.
What significance is the skull? It's a UFO research.
The Star Child can provide proof that is undeniable, the holy grail of the field of UFO alien research.
These very short beings came out that were probably about 3 to 3.5 feet tall with black eyes.
People have been seeing aliens for thousands of years, but there's never been a single piece of hard evidence. Now, it's possible the Star Child skull is just that.
We are here today with Lloyd Pye, who has worked as a military intelligence specialist. He has more than 30 years studying cryptozoology. He's the primary expert on the Star Child skull, having researched it for more than a decade.
Why all this interest in it?
I believe that it stands a very good chance of being the smoking gun that everybody is looking for, the holy grail of the field of UFO alien research.
What I want to hear first is not only what do the specialists and the medical doctors think, but what kind of tests have been done and what exactly were the results.
Could you walk us through the main differences between the Star Child skull and a normal human skull?
The eye sockets of a normal human are about 2 inches. Star Child's not even 1. There are no sinuses in here, no upper sinuses at all. Then you turn them around, you notice that the chewing muscles that come up through here and spread out to attach your jaw and chew cover quite a wide area here. With the Star Child, it's much reduced, so we have a much smaller, much reduced lower face. And there are fibers woven through the matrix of the bone, which were found under a scanning electron microscope.
Does this skull have any fibers at all?
No skull of any kind of primate that we know of, or any really bone that we know of, has those kind of fibers. They seem to be unique to the Star Child.
Although I haven't seen a gray myself, I mean, everyone kind of knows what they're supposed to look like. A large head, wraparound eyes, small mouth, and it seems like this skull would sort of fit in with that description.
If you turn around and look on the inside, and you feel in here, you feel that ridging of bone that will hold the cerebellum in place. With the Star Child, because it has such expanded brain pressing down that way at such a steep angle, we should have a spreading of the foramen magnum, but we don't. So we have a very different kind of brain in this skull, whatever it is. Now, if you stick your finger in the foramen magnum hole to simulate a neck, right, you see how the human is there, so it would be like this, but the Star Child's actually balanced like this. So it's kind of like a misshapen golf ball on a tee. It's very different from the human neck in that it's half the size and it's centered up under the head.
When you see how the neck connects to the skull, that's a closure for me. It's not a deformity. It was built that way.
We've had the DNA of the human tested fully recovered, no problem, normal human being. But in 2003 we found that the DNA of the Star Child was very different. While we could recover its mitochondrial DNA, which comes from its mother, the nuclear DNA, which contains the DNA of its mother and its father, we could not recover that, which indicates that there's something very unusual, if not completely different, about the father.
Where is the mitochondrial DNA from?
In all of our cells, we have cytoplasm. Floating inside the cytoplasm are little chips. Imagine them as raisins floating in a soup. Those little mitochondria come down from your mother.
Is this the mother of the skull? Is that what we're saying?
We have been able to prove that is not the case for sure. They are not genetically related.
In the case of the star child skull, mitochondrial DNA has proven that the mother is human. However, nuclear DNA, it should have proven that the father was human as well, but it didn't. It was inconclusive. What this means is that the mother is human, but the father is simply unknown.
To your knowledge, is there any reason why the nuclear DNA was not recoverable other than the fact that it's not a human father?
If the father had been human, all indications are it should have pulled up very easily with the primers that were used, but it didn't, so we can only conclude that there's something very unusual about the father.
Guys, I think one of the problems to getting answers to this skull is that it's obviously incomplete. I mean, a large portion of it is missing. The entire maxilla and facial structure is gone. I'd like to know if you would mind if we took this to Los Angeles and have a specialist reconstruct this so that we could see what this person or creature looked like when it was alive.
I would be as anxious to see what it would look like as you.
The Starchild skull has an oversized cranium which looks like it had a much larger capacity for a brain, and this matches up with the alien that crashed at Roswell, which showed a multiple-lobed brain. Now these are reproductions, of course, and the reproductions were done by computer, so these are exact reproductions of the real skull.
They are identical. We have a normal and an abnormal skull. We need to check the differences between the two by measuring the volume of the brain capacities. We know that a normal brain is 1,350 to 1,400 cubic centimeters. There's a scientific test to measure brain capacity, and that's simply to fill it up with birdseed. And that's what we're about to do.
Just pour some in here?
Pour some in. All right, that's enough for now.
Here's Pat, pouring and pouring and pouring. It's still going.
This is the bottomless skull here.
And he's not stopping. He's keeping on going. Okay, gents, empty your skulls.
$1,250 milliliters. That's a lot of birdseed. I don't think there's more birdseed in that skull.
I don't think you can come to a conclusion until you've finished the experiment, right? That's real science, isn't it?
Very true.
Mr. Science Guy. Okay.
So that's 1,000?
That's 1,000.
Just about.
And then the rest is all gravy. Visually, from the outside, the normal human skull actually appears larger, so it's strange that the Star Child skull would be getting so much birdseed in it.
It's more.
Holy mackerel.
There are exactly 200 milliliters more in the Star Child skull.
Now this is a huge difference. We're talking about 15% more brain capacity here, which could completely bulge out a normal skull. With all that said, I'm still not convinced that this is alien.
Why is this more brain material? There are a number of explanations for it. Not that this is an accident of nature, or not that this is a brain deformity, but this was a designed skull, and that brain has more functionality than the accompanying adult skull. This skull exactly conforms to the Walter Reed Army Hospital autopsy on the little gray that they retrieved from the crash at Roswell. Now the difference is that this might have had 3 lobes because it has human DNA, but the Army autopsy basically confirmed this. It was in black and white.
Black and white as in documents. It's been documented. There is proof that there's actually this autopsy. From what I've heard, it's just hearsay.
Well, you're wrong. When Kevin challenges me, I love it. That's like, I'm glad you asked that question, because I've got the answer. They didn't confirm it, because the Pentagon to this day hasn't actually confirmed there was a crash at Roswell, no less an alien tested at Walter Reed Army Hospital, but they didn't deny it. Not one refutation came out of the Pentagon. They never objected to this.
And they never confirmed it either.
It happened. Sorry. It happened. It was here.
It was a cover-up. I mean, it's evident.
He said, this is a big desert out here. Nothing but a desert. He said, we can take you out there and bury your bodies and nobody will ever find you.
We're racing with the undertaker, and a deathbed testimony is admissible in any court of law as physical evidence. The knowledge that we are not alone, that we are dealing with some phenomena that may indeed be off the planet, is so earth-shaking that it still requires that greater level of evidence.
A third party has come into possession of some items. If they pan out and go all the way through the due diligence process and come out at the end of the line authentic, then in my mind we have a significant proof for the Roswell event as an extraterrestrial event.
To a small but dedicated group of UFO researchers, this barren ranch land, 75 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico, is sacred territory. It's the place where they believe one or more alien spaceships crashed to Earth sometime in early July 1947.
I think there was probably a mid-air collision that resulted in one going one way and exploding and dumping all the wreckage out in the debris field, the other making it down almost intact.
Today, that crash, commonly referred to as the Roswell incident, is the stuff of legend. But we might never have heard of Roswell if not for a former nuclear physicist turned UFO researcher named Stan Friedman. After spending nearly 30 years investigating the incident, hunting down dozens of key witnesses and scores of top-secret documents, Friedman is convinced that the U.S. government is covering up a UFO crash. This is his proof. It begins in 1978, when after giving a lecture on UFOs, someone casually asks if he's ever met former military intelligence officer Jesse Marcel.
Brilliant investigator that I am, I said, "Who's he?" I never heard of him. "Oh, well, he handled pieces of the wreckage in one of those saucers you're interested in." What?
Friedman tracks down Marcel in Louisiana and first hears the fantastic tale about the day Marcel helped recover a real alien spaceship.
There were just fragments strewn all over the area, an area about 3/4 of a mile long and several hundred feet wide.
So, Jesse tells me his story was in newspapers around the world, but he doesn't remember the exact date. And he tells me how they took the wreckage to Fort Worth, Texas, and he was told not to say anything.
Friedman checks with the local Roswell paper, and sure enough, there it is. July 8th, 1947, Roswell Army Air Force captures flying saucer.
It was a big sensational thing. Front page headlines, not just the Roswell Daily Record, which is kind of a small paper, but in the West Coast papers, Los Angeles Herald Express, huge paper, and so forth.
But there's a follow-up story, too. One day later, a report from the U.S. military that the wreckage isn't a crashed UFO after all. It's pieces of a downed weather balloon. But now, 30 years later, here's Marcel telling Friedman the balloon story is false, part of a cover-up by the U.S. government.
One thing I was certain of, being familiar with all air activities, that it was not a weather balloon, nor an aircraft, nor a missile. It was something else, of which we didn't know what it was.
In the weeks leading up to the Roswell incident, the country is gripped by UFO fever after a commercial pilot reports seeing 9 strange objects flying over Washington state.
He said that they acted like saucers, bobbing or skipping across the water. It was from him that the term flying saucer came from.
Hundreds of flying saucer sightings pour in, especially in New Mexico, home to top-secret test sites for V-2 rockets and atomic and nuclear weapons. The city of Roswell itself is the base of the 509th, the world's only atomic air squadron. Just 2 years earlier, it had dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
If aliens were going to be interested in anything that happened on this planet, boy, they'd make a beeline for New Mexico.
As the story goes, On that fateful night in early July 1947, a violent thunderstorm rolls through Roswell. Out in the desert, rancher Mac Brazel sleeps fitfully in his tiny cabin.
There had been a big electric storm, and he heard what he thought was an explosion that didn't sound like thunder.
The next morning, Brazel checks on his animals and notices they won't cross a pasture. He goes for a closer look and stumbles across debris littered over a large field.
And he finds this huge amount of stuff, strange material, covering an area hundreds of feet wide by almost 3/4 of a mile long.
The material is odd, lightweight, but incredibly strong. Brazel carries a few pieces to his neighbor's ranch.
Kind of a tan, light brown plastic.
Brazel mentions other debris, items covered with strange writing.
He said the writing wasn't like Japanese writing, but it was, I imagine, more like hieroglyphics or something like that.
The strangest material looks like aluminum foil, but with a weird ability to return to its original shape.
If you picked it up and folded it, it would unfold. And if you folded it several times, it would still unfold. And you couldn't tear it.
Brazel drags some of the debris to a shed. A few days later, he's on the phone with Frank Joyce, a local DJ and radio reporter.
They began to talk about things that might be out of this world. I thought maybe this is a hoax.
During the conversation, Joyce says Brazel mentions finding bodies in the wreckage.
And one thing that he mentioned on the phone was the horrible odor that was with these bodies.
Thinking Brazel might be insane, Joyce tries to end the call.
I advised him to go to the U.S. Army Air Corps because they are flyers and will know what to do about anything that flies.
Brazel does call Roswell Army Airfield. Major Jesse Marcel answers the phone. Marcel reports the call to his commanding officer, who orders him and a counterintelligence officer to go investigate.
He says, go out with him because the rancher said there's a whole mess of this stuff out there, and nothing that he brought in was conventional.
At the ranch, Marcel is also puzzled by the debris. He gathers it up and heads back to Roswell. He's so excited by the potential discovery, he stops by his home after midnight and wakes his wife and 11-year-old son, Jesse Jr.
He said something like, this is parts of what we feel is a flying saucer.
Jesse Marcel Jr. is a doctor and colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves. He just got back from Iraq. He's writing a manuscript called Roswell, It Really Happened. Even though it happened many years ago, he still vividly remembers what his father showed him that night.
I picked up the material and I noticed it had a very strange quality to it. It was very light. I didn't try to bend it or tear it, but I just kind of looked at it and just kind of wondered what this was.
Marcel's father continues on to the base to report his findings to his superiors. The next morning, the base commander orders the public information officer to write a press release about the incident.
He gave me exactly what he wanted in the press release, that we had in our possession a flying disc.
The story hits the airwaves, creating an instant sensation.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
But almost as quickly begins what appears to be a government cover-up.
From the time that story came out, I felt that someone somewhere was trying to stop every last word of this story.